I want to get behind this guy. I would give anything to be the second guitar behind this mother.
That's my feeling the last time I spoke to him.
Keith Richards actually admitted some musicians were so good they completely amazed him. And one of them he nearly got into a fight with. This rock legend, who usually slams music he hates, secretly looks up to the original stars of rock and roll. These are the few people Keith desperately wished he could have shared a stage with. Let us now find out which musical genius almost came to blows with the unshakable Keith Richards. 1. Blue Moon Boys.
You want those surprises along with whatever else comes, you know. That's life.
While Keith Richards often sounded off about music he thought was rubbish, he also had a huge amount of respect for the real trailblazers, the ones who started it all. If Keith could jump in a time machine with his guitar, his dream wouldn't be to play in some giant stadium. Instead, he'd probably head right to a small studio in Memphis, Tennessee, back in the mid-1950s. That studio was Sun Studio, and he'd want to plug in and jam with Elvis Presley's first amazing band. Scotty Moore on guitar, Bill Black on bass, and later DJ Fontana on drums. This group wasn't just any band. They were making a sound that would shake up the entire world. For Keith, these musicians, sometimes called the Hillbilly Cats, before DJ Fontana joined, weren't just playing backup for Elvis. They were helping to create a sound that was totally new and incredibly exciting. Scotty Moore, especially, was a true guitar hero for Keith. His playing on those early Elvis songs like That's All Right, Mystery Train, and Good Rockin' Tonight was completely fresh.
With a bunch of men in a big place away out yonder, and while I was there, well, these men kind of guessed, you might say.
It was clean, sharp, and full of bluesy licks mixed with a country sound. Scotty played with a cool, simple style that Keith would have immediately recognized as brilliant. He didn't just play fast solos, he played smart guitar lines that wrapped around Elvis's voice, making those records so special. Keith always liked guitar players who had great feel and taste, not just speed, and Scotty Moore had that in spades. Every note he played mattered.
I would hate to say strictly country because of the fact that I liked all different types of music when I was a child.
Then there was Bill Black, slapping his big stand-up bass. He played with a raw, wild energy that drove the rhythm like a powerful train. It wasn't just about hitting the right notes, it was about creating that urgent, exciting beat that made you want to jump up and dance. This was the sound of freedom, the sound of young energy breaking loose. And when DJ Fontana joined on drums, he brought a simple but solid beat that held everything together perfectly without ever being too loud or flashy. It had that perfect rockabilly swing.
Those first Sun records with Elvis, you know, here's Scotty Moore's guitar, just, you know what I mean, it's like...
Keith Richards often talked about the magic of those early recordings at Sun Records. The music was stripped down to just the basics: a singer, a guitar, a bass, and simple drums. Everything was recorded live, full of raw energy. There was no room for faking it, no fancy studio tricks to hide behind. It was pure, strong rock and roll at its very best. Keith always loved honest music and the power of a great band playing together in one room, so this kind of setup was his ideal. That raw Sun magic was pure lightning, but another young Texan with glasses and a Fender Stratocaster would soon show Keith how to write songs that truly sang. 2. Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
Well, you know, when we laid that mahogany all stuff on her, you know.
That early wild rockabilly sound of Elvis and his band was truly exciting, but Keith Richards also had a deep appreciation for smart songwriting and new ideas. A young musician from Texas named Buddy Holly really caught his attention with his clever tunes and his cool band, the Crickets. It wasn't just about untamed energy with Buddy, it was about fresh sounds, incredibly smart songs, and a band that worked together like a well-oiled machine. Keith thought Buddy Holly and the Crickets were amazing, true pioneers who helped write the rule book for rock and roll.
Go to a guitar solo instead of playing single notes.
What made Buddy Holly so special, and what surely impressed Keith, was his all-around musical talent. Buddy wasn't just a charismatic singer. He was a very skilled guitarist who played a Fender Stratocaster, which was a fairly new guitar back then. He had his own unique style. Most importantly, Buddy wrote his own songs, which wasn't something all early rock and rollers did.
So we'll bring out Mr. Bebop himself, Gene Biscuit. Here he is. How about it?
And these weren't just simple songs about teenage crushes. They were well-crafted pieces with catchy melodies, surprisingly clever chords, and often a sensitive or thoughtful feeling that was different. Just think of songs like Peggy Sue, with its famous drumming by Jerry Allison, or the beautiful vocal harmonies on Every Day, or the pure rock and roll power of Oh Boy.
They used a cardboard box on that, so when we started to do Not Fade Away, we said, hey, that sounded good then, so let's do it again.
The Crickets, usually Jerry Allison on drums, Joe B. Malden on bass, and Nicky Sullivan on rhythm guitar in their most famous lineup, weren't just guys playing in the background. They were a key part of the sound. Buddy Holly and the Crickets were one of the very first rock and roll groups to be a complete package. They wrote their own songs, played their own instruments, and sang their own vocals. This idea, the 4- or 5-piece rock band, became the way most bands were set up later, including the Rolling Stones. Keith would have really respected this band setup.
Well, Jerry Allison, the drummer, is 19, and Joe Malden, the bass player, is 18.
He always believed in the magic that happens when musicians play together, when a group can create something bigger and better than any one person could alone. The Crickets had that special connection. Jerry Allison's drumming, in particular, was very creative for its time. He didn't just keep time, he added unique rhythms that made the song stand out. For Keith, who was starting to write his own songs, Buddy Holly's ability to create such memorable and different kinds of songs must have been a huge inspiration. Buddy wasn't afraid to try new things in the studio, like recording his voice or instruments multiple times on the same track to create layers of sound. This was pretty advanced stuff for the late 1950s. He had a spirit of adventure, combined with a strong understanding of music basics, which is something Keith always looked up to. Also, Buddy Holly looked different from other rebellious rock stars. He was a polite young man with glasses who just happened to make incredibly exciting music. This proved that rock and roll wasn't just about looking tough, it was also about real musical skill. Buddy Holly showed Keith the art of the song and the power of a tight band. But for pure, unadulterated sonic mayhem, another Richard would take center stage. 3. Little Richard.
Can you talk about the kind of impact that rock and roll had on you when you first heard it? What were some of the first things that came to your ears?
Smart songwriting was definitely important, a key part of building great music. But for Keith Richards, the true spirit of rock and roll also came from its wild, explosive energy. And nobody embodied that raw, untamed power more than a unique performer from Macon, Georgia, Little Richard. Whenever Keith talked about the beginnings of rock, he always mentioned Little Richard with a sense of true amazement. The incredible, pure power and basic rock and roll sound of Little Richard and his super energetic band were a huge influence on Keith. They were like a bolt of lightning that showed him what it really meant to cut loose and go wild.
Well, you know, when we laid that mahogany all stuff on her, you know.
Little Richard wasn't just a singer, he was like a human hurricane. He pounded the piano, his voice screamed with the power of gospel music, and he could switch from a low growl to a high-pitched wail in a split second. His stage presence was incredibly flashy and exciting. It was all completely new and shocking in the mid-1950s. Songs like Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, Rip It Up, and Good Golly, Miss Molly weren't just simple tunes. They were like explosions of sound and energy that hit you with incredible force. For a young Keith Richards,
We hope you neighbors enjoy this little tune we did for the King Record Company along.
listening to this music must have been like seeing a brand new, bright color for the first time. It was loud, it was fast, it was rebellious, and it was clearly black music, which Keith and his friends were actively searching out. And the band playing with Little Richard was just as important. They had to be able to keep up with his incredible energy, and they did, laying down a beat that was both super powerful and amazingly tight. Drummers like Earl Palmer and Charles Connor provided the thunderous, driving rhythm that was so crucial to Little Richard's sound. This beat was much more aggressive and upfront than a lot of the popular music that came before it. The saxophone players, often including Lee Allen and Alvin Red Tyler, blew wild, exciting solos that added to the wonderful, joyful noise. This was a band that was on fire, a band that knew exactly what they needed to do: create a launching pad for Richard's amazing vocals and piano attacks. Keith, who always loved a band that could really lock in and groove together, would have been totally captivated by the raw power of Little Richard's group. They weren't just playing notes, they were creating pure, unfiltered excitement. That raw energy was everything. Little Richard boiled rock and roll down to its most basic and thrilling parts. The words to his songs were often a bit naughty, the rhythms made you want to dance, and the overall feeling was one of wild, happy freedom. This was the sound of old rules being smashed, of a new generation finding its own powerful voice. Keith always knew that the deepest roots of this music lay in the blues, and one particular master from Chicago, along with his band, held the key to that sacred ground. 4. Muddy Waters. All that wild energy of early rock and roll definitely got Keith Richards excited, but he always knew, deep down in his soul, where the real, true heart of the music he loved so much came from. It came from the blues. And when you talk about the blues, especially the electric, amplified kind that grew out of the Mississippi Delta and took root in the smoky clubs of Chicago, one name stood taller than almost any other: Muddy Waters. For Keith, Muddy Waters and his band, especially the one he had in the early 1950s, weren't just an influence. They were essential. They were like a cornerstone for his whole musical journey and the very soul of what the Rolling Stones would try to capture in their own music. Muddy Waters took the raw emotional power of country blues from the South and plugged it into an amplifier. This created a sound that was tougher, louder, and a perfect fit for the bustling city. His band during that early 1950s period was an incredible collection of blues talent. It often included legends like Little Walter playing the harmonica, Jimmy Rogers on guitar, Otis Spann on piano, and drummers like Elgin Evans or Fred Below. This group didn't just play songs, they created a whole atmosphere. It was a thick, swampy, and unbelievably groovy sound that could be both a bit scary and deeply soulful. Keith would have heard in this music the honest, real truth that he was always looking for. This was the original stuff.
There will never be a Little Walter.
Little Walter's harmonica playing was completely new and amazing. He played his harmonica through an amplifier, making it wail and moan like a human voice or a saxophone, full of incredible feeling. Jimmy Rogers' guitar playing was the perfect partner for Muddy's slide guitar, creating a solid, shuffling rhythm. Otis Spann's piano playing was pure Chicago blues, with rolling chords and beautiful little melodies. And the drummers laid down a beat that was loose but strong, pushing the music forward with a rhythm you just couldn't resist. For Keith, who would later work so hard to master rhythm guitar and understand how a blues band really worked, listening to Muddy Waters Group must have been like going to school with the best teachers every time he played one of their records. The Rolling Stones, as many people know, actually named their band after a Muddy Waters song from 1950 called "Rollin' Stone." That shows just how deep their connection to his music was. When the Stones first started, they were basically a blues cover band. They were trying to play the music of their heroes like Muddy, Howlin' Wolf, and Chuck Berry for audiences in Britain who mostly had never heard this kind of music before. Keith has talked many times about how amazing it was to discover these records, to finally hear music that spoke to him in such a powerful way.
A lot of people wonder, what is the blues? I hear a lot of people saying the blues, the blues.
Keith's appreciation for groundbreaking American ensemble playing didn't stop there, even extending to the revolutionary sounds of an earlier era and a true jazz giant. 5. Louis Armstrong.
Steady blowing, they up there watching the box office and forget about them people. And when you look around, you don't hear them no more.
The blues was definitely the main ingredient in Keith Richards' musical stew, but his love for groundbreaking American music and amazing bands playing together wasn't limited to just one style. His ears were open to any sound that felt real, new, and had that special spark of a group creating something magical together.
You said you swallowed 2,000 pounds worth of pills a year. Is this true?
No.
It might surprise some people who only think of Keith as a rock and roll outlaw, but he also had huge admiration for the totally new sounds of early jazz. Specifically, he respected one of its true founders and most famous figures, Louis Armstrong and his incredible bands, especially the Hot 5 and Hot 7 from the 1920s.
Introduce that nigga. Can't do it. So the Dalton boys want to wash him with in.
Louis Satchmo Armstrong wasn't just a trumpet player. He was a musical genius who changed everything. He pretty much invented the idea of the improvised jazz solo, where a musician makes up a melody on the spot, as we know it. He also transformed the rhythm of jazz with his advanced sense of swing, and he was one of the first great jazz singers making scat singing nonsense syllables, popular.
Well, you know, when we laid that mahogany hall stump on her, you know.
For Keith, who has always looked up to pioneers, those people who didn't just follow trends, but actually created them, Armstrong was a giant. To think about being part of one of Satchmo's early bands, seeing that level of creativity happen right in front of him, would have been an incredible thrill. The recordings made by Louis Armstrong's Hot 5 and Hot 7 in the mid to late 1920s are true classics. These were small groups, often with musicians like Kid Ory on trombone, Johnny Dodds on clarinet, Lil Hardin Armstrong, who was Louis' wife then, on piano, and Johnny St. Cyr on banjo or guitar.
Well, nothing but the things we did when we was in the 20s, youngsters, you know.
Together, they created a lively, complex sound where multiple musicians played different melody lines at the same time. It was full of joy, energy, and amazing musical skill. Armstrong's trumpet playing was simply stunning, clear, strong, and incredibly creative. His solos weren't just about showing off, they were beautifully crafted musical statements. Keith, being a musician who really understands melody and how to shape a musical phrase, would have recognized the pure brilliance in Armstrong's playing.
And the new name is rock and roll, but it's sanctified music.
Keith's heart still held a special place for that raw, rebellious spirit of rockabilly, and another electrifying guitarist leading a different wild bunch perfectly captured that untamed essence. 6. The Blue Caps. From the early days of jazz and its incredible new ideas, Keith Richards' musical heart always found its way back to that raw, rebellious beat of early rock and roll. He especially loved the wild, untamed energy of rockabilly, and one band that perfectly captured that edgy, supercharged sound, playing behind a frontman in leather, who was often pretty wild himself, was the Blue Caps. This was Gene Vincent's legendary backup group. Keith had massive respect for these guys, seeing them as some of the best players of that authentic, Gretsch guitar-fueled wildness that he absolutely adored.
I mean, I'm much better looking than these than Joan Collins.
Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps burst onto the music scene in 1956 with their famous song Bebop-A-Lula, a track that just oozed a kind of dangerous coolness. Gene Vincent himself, with his injured leg, intense singing, and sometimes unpredictable stage act, was a truly captivating performer. But it was the sound of the Blue Caps that really made them stand out. And the most important part of that sound was their original lead guitarist, Cliff Gallup. To put it simply, Gallup was amazing. His guitar playing was incredibly fast, super creative, and had a special echo-filled tone that became a signature of the rockabilly style. He could switch from playing complex, finger-picked melodies to wild, bluesy solos so smoothly it would take your breath away. For a young, aspiring guitarist like Keith Richards, hearing Cliff Gallup must have been a mind-blowing experience. Gallup was a master of his instrument, but his playing always fit the song perfectly and was packed with energy and attitude.
So we'll bring out Mr. Bebop-A-Lula himself, Gene Vincent. Here he is.
The classic Blue Caps lineup, which included Gallup, Willie Williams on rhythm guitar, Jack Neal on the big stand-up bass, and Dickie Bebop Harrell on drums, who was famous for his wild screams on Bebop-A-Lula, created a sound that was tight, full of energy, and had a real swagger. They had a raw, almost threatening edge that made them different from some of the more polished pop singers of the time. Their music was a powerful mix of country, blues, and hillbilly boogie, all cranked up with rock and roll energy. This was exactly the kind of stripped-down, no-nonsense rock and roll that Keith always loved. It was all about the feel, the excitement, and the way the musicians played together.
We hope you neighbors enjoy this little tune we did for the King Record Company along.
To be part of the Blue Caps, especially during that early time when Cliff Gallup was playing those incredible guitar parts, would have been a dream come true for Keith. Just imagine being on stage, plugged into that raw power, with Gallup tearing off those wild solos and Gene Vincent giving it his all on the microphone. It was music that felt dangerous and thrilling, the true sound of young rebellion. Keith Richards deeply admired these pioneers, the architects of the sound he loved. Whose musical heroes do you think defined rock and roll? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe.